Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back. And right now, I'm just going to take a crack at responding to every single comment that was on this last video. I mean, there's not a lot of them. Some of them are pretty interesting, and I'm not going to shy away from any of them. I'll have something to say about every single comment that you made, every primary comment you made. I'm not going to comment to every single reply to all those comments, but to every primary comment, I'm going to have something to say. So let's give it a try. Responding to comments, most of them about Ken Ham, Succession, and the Ark Encounter. We've got that coming up next. Yep, so here it is. Here's the last video that I published this month in creationism, because I'm a little behind on doing this on a weekly basis. So let's strive for this month in creationism. And we talked about Ken Ham. We talked about the new creationism, or a group of creationists that have a little bit different flavor than the usual young earth creationist. And we talked a little bit about the attendance decline at the Ark Encounter. And so to that, I got some responses to that video, and we're just going to take a look. So here we go. And I've covered the names to protect the innocent. And so you know who you are, and the ones that are going to watch this video are most likely the ones that comment on my videos. So you will see your comment here and my response. And I will say that although this is fairly easy for me to do, and I think for those of you who comment, it's interesting. I will tell you that my mailbox episodes, responding to people who have written and asked questions, and me making videos out of it, they're some of the least watched videos that I produce. And I'm human. When you do something like this and you get less of a response than something else maybe you worked on, the tendency is to want to do the one that you get more clicks for. It's human nature. So that's why I don't do that. I don't do this as often as I might, even though it's a relatively easy thing for me to do. So let's just get cracking. And I'm taking them in order. No preference here. I'm just going straight down the list. On that attendance graph, referencing the attendance of the Ark Encounter I had over the last 8 years, we need a line for what the attendance would need to be to justify that hilariously gigantic parking lot. Yes. I'm not going to bring it up right here, but there is images on the internet easily found of the absolutely enormous parking lot at the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, near Williamsburg, Kentucky. Or Williamstown, Kentucky. And when they first, and it's important to note what's interesting about this particular comment, and what's relevant about the comment is that when they built the Ark Encounter, when all they had was the Ark, not all the other attractions that they have today, which are they've probably quadrupled the size of the park itself in terms of the attractions and things to do at the Ark Encounter. When it was just the Ark that was not even quite complete, they already had a parking lot that could, I think it was fit 4,000 or so vehicles. I mean, it was to be able to have something like 10 or 12,000 people there in a single day. And that shows the anticipation of what they had hoped or anticipated to be the level of interest in the Ark Encounter was the parking lot itself. And so there are many images where, and I've been to the Ark Encounter multiple times, and every time I drive through Kentucky, I always drive by, I take a picture of the parking lot, or I take a look at the parking lot, I count up the cars. And even on a weekend, they're only using one half of the parking lot, and the other half is usually blocked off, and then sometimes they use the other portion of it. I think they've probably had some special events where they kind of get kind of close to filling up and seeming like they need the entire parking lot, but the parking lot was an overreach, no doubt about it. And so, yeah, how high would the attendance have to be over the year to justify that parking lot? I think we'd be talking about 1.5 to 2 million visitors a year, whereas they're more in the range of 750,000 to 900,000 visitors in a year now, especially this past year. They've been over 1 million in the past, but it's certainly sub 1 million now. All right, that's comment number one. Thanks. I guess I should go see the Ark Encounter before it goes bankrupt and closes down, but I'm not by Kentucky anytime soon. My response to that is you have plenty of time to get there. It's not going to go bankrupt anytime soon. Just because attendance has declined some 20 or 30%, well, the cost of going has also increased 20 or 30%, if not more. I think that they're probably bringing in about the same amount of revenue. And when you consider that you got your zip line, you've got your merry-go-round, which you have to pay for your kids to get on. You can ride a camel. There's a restaurant there. They're building yet another restaurant there. There's plenty of opportunities for you to get your wallet out and fork out or more money. And so the average spend of an individual family going there has probably increased quite a bit. And so I wouldn't say that their revenue stream has decreased. Now, the size of the park has gotten much, much larger, which means you need a much larger group of volunteers and employees. And when I say volunteers, because during the summer they have a large number of volunteers. They've even constructed a residence area, on the ground, so people don't have to, rent places and be outside. I mean, they can be on the compound itself, all right, and live there. And that has helped them bring in more volunteers, which then help them run their larger summer programs. But nonetheless, more buildings, especially more animals in the zoo and botanical gardens and other things, require more full-time employees and upkeep. And you just have more facilities, larger facilities. And so the expense of that is also increasing. So a little hard to say exactly where they're at in terms of the revenue, because it's not a for-profit organization, and they don't have to, report that to the public. The other reason why I would say, if you don't hold your breath, if you're thinking bankruptcy, because they still get plenty of donations, and this is a donation-assisted ministry, and so it's not all about just like attendance and how many you bring in. There's still going to be people who feel like this is a valuable witness or ministry, and so they're donating money for the fact that it's a witness, even if there aren't as many people coming. And they have tons of special events, and they have an event, center now, conference center, and so they can generate more income through that conference center. That conference center then doesn't necessarily equate to people paying for the park, but they are there and they're probably eating food and they're buying books. And, it's like there's lots of residual ways to generate income at the Ark Encounter. So I don't think that there's, I don't think that bankruptcy is on the horizon. However, this does relate to the other topic of this month in creationism, and that is the succession plan for Ken Ham, which we've talked about several times. And that would be the big wild card, right? Because Ken Ham is such a draw, and he's the most important individual with respect to the generation of donations. And so what happens when Ken Ham's no longer there? Well, they're still use his name, and he'll be on video. And hey, these days you got AI avatars and so forth. There'll probably be like an animated avatar version of Ken Ham that will continue to generate new videos when he's gone. But still, I would hope you would think that's still not the same as the real thing. And so the replacement for Ken Ham becomes ever so critical in terms of the financial stability of an organization like Answers in Genesis. But all that said, I don't think that it's just going to disappear when Ken Ham leaves. All right. One of the things I find puzzling, but then maybe not as much as I should, is the apparent lack of speed in finding a replacement for Martin Iles. It's almost as if the true problem wasn't doctrinal, but plainly spoken, the fact that Ken Ham doesn't want to give up any control. I mean, Ken Ham certainly does like his control, and as long as his health is with him, I think that he feels like there really isn't anybody better to do what he's doing, that his ministry would thrive the most with him in charge. We could relate this to many other mega pastors and others who have probably should have retired earlier than they did with respect to the health of their ministry overall, and the tendency for those who have been in charge of something for so long to become, how shall we say it, a little bit ego-driven and a little bit difficult for them to assess themselves, especially when they've surrounded themselves by people that clearly idolize him and tell him what he wants to hear. And that's always a danger for any leader. This is not unique to Ken Ham by any means. You can see it in so many different organizations. And so that's just something that, is going to be a growing problem the longer he's there. But yes, I am puzzled too. I really am. I'm puzzled by the fact that we've heard nothing since Martin Iles left. It's Martin Iles is suddenly just gone, and wiped from the memory of him actually having ever been there. Barely registers on their website. I think he was there approximately 2 years, if you include the entire time of wooing him and him sort of coming on board, and then to the point where he left. But in terms of his real time of activity there, it's really a 9-month window in my mind, at least in terms of my memory and of when he was fairly active and actually seemed to be at Answers in Genesis and doing things that were CEO like. But Ken Ham had never really left the scene. Now he clearly had let up the reins and was transitioning power. That doesn't seem to be any doubt. And there was a huge amount of upheaval at Answers in Genesis when Martin Iles moved in. Remember Ken Ham's brother-in-law, Bodhi Hodge, he moved on from Answers in Genesis, one of the people that potentially would have been a successor of Ken Ham. And there were others that have left Answers in Genesis. So there has been a bit of a shifting of, I guess we'll say it politely, a shifting of priorities. And that always creates administrative and organizational upheaval. And that happened. And then things seemed to quiet down, and it was sort of like, okay, Martin Iles is going to ramp it up over time. And then all of a sudden he's gone. And he's out there doing his own thing, creating his own ministry, trying to raise funds to do another Christian ministry, and has barely spoken. I follow Martin Iles on various social media and so forth, and he does not ever really talk about Answers in Genesis and what happened there. It's all very, very hush-hush. But that does raise the specter of, well, what exactly are they doing? Where's Ken Ham looking next? What's that recruitment process like? Is it happening at all? Do they already have somebody in mind and they're just, maybe it's in-house and so they don't need to make a big deal about it? I thought the idea was that they needed more of a name than anybody that's there. I mean, what happens when you're in an organization that has a clear top dog, right? And it's clearly the face of the organization, right? They are Answers in Genesis. Ken Ham is Answers in Genesis. And actually, that was part of the dispute of the split from 2000 and, when was that? 2004, 2006, something like that. Creation Ministries International splitting off. I mean, that was part of the issue, was that Ken Ham was being criticized for having too much top-down control and the dangers of having a single leader and having everything dependent on that one person's survival and continued faithfulness. I'm sorry, went off on a tangent there. Yes, I don't know what's going to happen here and who might be next, but we do have somebody in another comment that makes a couple suggestions about who could succeed Ken Ham, several of which I found quite intriguing and we need to talk about. So let's get to that. Regarding the search for next generation's charismatic mega pastors, I think we're noticing all the pastor scandals of the past: Jerry Falwell, Jimmy Swaggart, Jim Baker, now Robert Morris, and many more could be listed. We're realizing that charismatic mega pastors are fallible. Absolutely. All right. Being a mega pastor, had that much power corrupts. Christians know that all too well, right? And yet, as all humans, have fallen into that trap continuously. We after a while, we tend to think that, we're God's next best gift to the world, and it's hard to be humble. So yeah, they're not people that should be put on a pedestal, and our particular idol environment in which we lift people up and either despise them as enemies or think they're the greatest thing ever that's always existed, but it seems to be accentuated in this age of social media. So we're turning toward normal people like you, Joel, people who are living and speaking authentically rather than putting on a show. Thanks. I really appreciate that. I try to be authentic, and I do struggle with striking the right balance of being critical and yet understanding. I'm not, as some might suggest in another comment here, in line to be successor for Ken Ham. That wouldn't work out so well for the organization at all. But I agree. It's really hard to find somebody who has a lot of cachet with a large number of individuals that hasn't like turned a lot of people off. Although, turning people off is not really a problem, right? I mean, that if there's anything we've learned from modern politics, you can turn off 50% of the population or more and still be incredibly powerful, as long as you have tight control on your followers. And that's what Ken Ham has, right? If you love Ken Ham, you absolutely love Ken Ham. I think he's awesome. And we're going to see that in one comment coming up here. And then, but if you don't, you don't, right? And it's those kind of leaders that are kind of necessary in today's environment. The organizations thrive on being in the news and being notable and being noticed. And the way to get noticed is to be out there and have a lot of flair. I think I could probably have 10 times as many, followers on this YouTube channel if I had a lot more charisma. And by charisma, I mean if I was a lot more animated and sarcastic and, had a lot of, made fun of things. And trust me, I do have the ability to do those things. It is in me there somewhere. But I try to squelch that. That's not my purpose or goal with this particular channel, is to necessarily grow it to 100,000 subscribers via any mechanism possible in order to make money. But enough of that. Enough about me. Let's move on. Welcome back, Joel. So good to see you. Yeah, I'm glad to be back. It's been a little hard to get back in the driver's seat here. I found it's like there is a sort of you have to talk a lot in order to be comfortable talking. And if you take some time off, it's a little hard to sort of gear up back into it. And I've been really busy. I am still very busy. I am far too involved in far too many projects, both work-related and outside of work. And I have consciously, as I said earlier, when I said I was going to be taking some time off, I have to force myself to move away because this is kind of fun to do. And I enjoy it, and therefore I will gravitate to doing this when there are larger projects that require more mental capacity that I need to focus on. And if I'm thinking about this, then it detracts from that. So it's been very hard to find the balance of everything. It's the work-life YouTube balance is hard to get. But yeah, I'm glad to be back. Honestly, Joel, what frustrates me so deeply is that there have been zero serious attempts to address the myriad of issues you raised in your series on the Red Sea. All right. I think they meant Dead Sea there. But I am going to talk about the Red Sea in some future episodes. Okay. But yeah, the Dead Sea, my Dead Sea series of videos. If you haven't watched that, those are ones I put some of the most effort into of anything I've done on this channel. And they were well viewed. So I was happy about that. I was actually very worried when I spent so much time putting that together that they would be dead on arrival. Haha. They need someone to go through it point by point. And when they realize it's utterly impossible to come to a coherent solution to all those problems, they need to admit it's impossible and that creationism is utter nonsense. Yes, I do go through very thoroughly sort of a blow by blow view of the Dead Sea and its origins. Where does the Dead Sea come from? It's like a question of, how did this thing get here? And it's in the Bible mentions the Dead Sea. So that puts constrictions on the various hypotheses you can generate if you're a Christian especially one who's a young earth creationist. And to me, when I presented that series, I said, this is a challenge to young earth creationists. Like, I am putting this effort into showing I challenge you because I just don't think you can come up with a way to fit this into your young earth paradigm. And I put that challenge out there, and I directly challenged a bunch of individuals specifically named young earth creationists to respond. And as this commenter points out, there has been 0 serious attempts. Actually, there's barely been any attempts at all, even non-serious attempts. There's just been a few comments in the comment section like, oh, no, you don't know what you're talking about, and young Earth creationism has the best answers, and it's like catastrophic plate tectonics explains it all. But that's not a response, because I provided very specific data, and I provided the observations, right? And young Earth creationists like to say we all have the same observations, the same true observations, facts. It's how we interpret them. Well, I presented the facts, the observations, and I provided an interpretation of them. And what I'm asking you for is look at those same facts, and please agree that they're the same facts. Or if you don't think they're the same facts, give me a reason why the facts are wrong. And then provide an alternative explanation, right? An interpretation within your paradigm of how to explain those observations. That's what nobody has done, right? They've made excuses and said you're wrong, but they haven't actually gone through the observations that I provided and provided another alternative viewpoint in any serious fashion. And that is really disappointing, but it's not surprising. Not at all surprising. I really wasn't expecting it. Maybe a young Earth creationist out there is doing a legitimate research right now and writing a response to me, and maybe they're going to publish it in a young Earth creationist journal that's peer reviewed and bring the hammer down on me. And if that's the case, I say, great. I look forward to that. And that will create a legitimate back and forth, because you look at this evidence, you're presenting you are presenting an argued point that presumably others have looked at and said they think that's a reasonable response. And then I'll have a chance to respond to that. And I think that would be fun. That would be fun. And I think informative to the audience, including you. What I've gotten, not fun, not informative, not helpful, and not surprising. Marcus Ross was at least respectful in his debate with Hugh Ross. I've seen parts of that particular debate. And yes, Marcus Ross is a very polite debater, and he will listen to the evidence presented, and he will respect other positions, and he will respectfully disagree as a young Earth creationist with that interpretation, but he actually will try to provide an alternative interpretation. You might think that interpretation is not a very good one, and you might say he's not accounting for all the information or ignoring certain pieces of data, but he is attempting to frame his response in terms of a hypothesis within the young Earth creationist perspective in a polite way, by respecting who he's talking to. And he gets huge points for me for that. I have met Marcus Ross, and I have talked to him. I have spent time with him. And I found him very challenging to talk to, because he knows a lot of stuff, right? And not just science stuff, but he knows paleontology, but he also knows his Bible. So he's a very effective communicator and very engaging to talk to. And so I think this comment might be in reference to hey, who could take the place of Ken Ham and would be good for Answers in Genesis? Well, obviously, I think Marcus Ross would be fantastic for Answers in Genesis. However, I'm not sure how effective he would be, because I think he's a little too honest. You have to be really charismatic, and you have to be willing to just take stands, and then you have to be willing to double down. That's how you survive in an organization like Answers in Genesis, which is more of a political animal than it is anything else. And Marcus Ross is not a politician for me at all. I'll just leave it at Marcus Ross does not have the personality and the type of the abilities to be able to handle the other employees who are at Answers in Genesis right now. And besides, Marcus Ross is one of the new creationists who has been dissed directly by Answers in Genesis and called a compromiser. So it's kind of unlikely that they would consider him on their short list of potential candidates to replace Ken Ham. I'm not sure what this commenter was necessarily thinking about that at all, but I'm just, I'm taking it that direction anyway. I'd like to see Dr. Jason Lisle named as Ken Ham's successor. Wow, this one really hit me because I've been thinking a lot about like just going down in my mind all the different young earth creationists and who could be recruited to replace Ken Ham. And this wasn't on my list, but seeing it here, I really had to think about that. And I thought it's not as crazy as it sounded at first. I thought, hey, and the reason I'm saying that is because the reason you might sound crazy is because Jason Lisle got his, I think that's his start. I think that's where he began after he got his doctorate, I think from University of Colorado, maybe Colorado Boulder, but I might be wrong. But I know it's in a Colorado institution, maybe Colorado State. I can't remember. I think that he came from there with his degree in astronomy or a PhD in astronomy. I think he came, or astrophysics. He came to Answers in Genesis and had his start at Answers in Genesis. Then he left Answers in Genesis and went to Institute for Creation Research. And then he was at Institute for Creation Research for a longer period of time. And then just a few years back, he left the Institute for Creation Research and began his own ministry, the Bible Science Institute, the BSI. And Jason Lisle was much more interested in Christian apologetics. He was just at a conference a week ago. I had a friend go there that I'm going to talk to soon about his experience at that conference because Dan Biddle was there and Carl Warner was there at the book table and so forth. That I'm just really interested in how their interactions went. But Jason Lisle was a primary speaker at a worldview. Well, it was War of the Worldviews. I can't even say the word. War of the Worldviews conference. And it had a variety of different Christian apologists who are on the kind of, I'll say, reformed apologetics, presuppositionalist types. And Jason Lisle fits into that particular camp. He's different than a lot of other young earth creationists in his theology, in his apologetic method, because I think he is more of a presuppositionalist. And he also, he fits into that crowd better, and that's not a Ken Ham sort of crowd, right? And so I don't know if that led to him leaving Answers in Genesis. I know he had conflicts with some of the directions that Institute for Creation Research was taking. So, so all that said, you might say like, well, yeah, of course he's not going to come back to Answers in Genesis. However, I have noticed in the last 6 months, I did find it curious. Just recently, it did hit me. Jason Lisle has been featured in several articles on Answers in Genesis website, and he has written a couple of articles for Answers in Genesis. I think maybe as an independent person now, he can kind of like be accepted by a number of different groups, because Answers in Genesis was not going to publish something that he wrote for them when he worked for Institute for Creation Research. They're competitors. As much as they have the same kind of ministries and they have the same goals, they are competitors and they do not really associate with each other very much. But now that he's outside that world, he's kind of like an independent person, and he's into Christian apologetics more so than creation science. Creation science is just a tool for his Christian apologetics. Then he can interact with past, I don't want to call them enemies, past employers, without as much friction. And Jason Lisle is pretty darn well spoken. I'm really bothered by some of his forms of argumentation, and some of his apologetic methods. But he kind of has a little bit of a mix of what would be necessary. He's pretty strong-willed, but he's more reasonable than Ken Ham. He's certainly more knowledgeable. He actually understands science pretty well, and he understands the data, whereas Ken Ham doesn't. And he is much more knowledgeable about the Bible than Ken Ham has. Ken Ham has a very rudimentary understanding of biblical theology and systematics and so forth. All right, it's very rudimentary. And so Jason Lisle he would actually be a halfway decent leader for Answers in Genesis. I mean, given all the other choices, that's not the worst idea that Ken Ham or others to Answers in Genesis. Now Jason Lisle's getting a little older, and he's not nearly as charismatic. I'm not sure, but he's well known within the young Earth creationist environment, and I think that people from all different followers of many different young Earth creationist organizations all would probably have a positive view of Jason Lisle. Whether he could be the bulldog that Ken Ham is and that Ken Ham is probably looking for, I don't think so. But that's a very interesting observation. You cover next comment. I gotta move along. It's already been 32 minutes here. You've probably covered this before, but where does the bulk of Ken Ham's funding actually come from? I understand that tickets, books, merch bring in some money and speaking events too, but I assume donations made up the most of it. And is Answers in Genesis mostly funded by mass grassroots giving? For most of its history, yes, grassroots giving. Small dollars, kids that had lemonade stands in the summer and, take their money and send it to Answers in Genesis. Yes, that literally does happen. And I actually know people. I know people who have mowed lawns and taken that money and sent it as a gift to Answers in Genesis. Multiple people who have done that. These are people that I've, gotten to know in graduate school who are mostly former young Earth creationists after they've gotten through college and graduate school. And many of them desired to become the next Ken Ham, but won't be because they don't believe what Ken Ham believes anymore. So yes, there is a tremendous amount of grassroots small dollar donations. Now, of course, they have a much more sophisticated operation now that includes recruiting people to include them in their wills, and so having estates given to them. So I would say a much larger percentage of their money comes from like big dollar donations. And then there is sort of the dark money web that also flows from like mega donators, multimillionaire, but even probably billionaires that donate to organizations or funds or PACs, whatever, that then fund organizations that are doing things that fit their narrative. I don't know how else to put that. I just know that the Answers in Genesis is getting a large amount of money from unknown sources that is in the millions. All right. And is purchasing things for them and so forth because of their social influence. And it would be the same kind of funds that are funding certain politicians. So they've tapped into those types of sources. And that might be what's, that's how they can afford their $40 million building, their corporate, literally, really corporate structure building, the old Toyota headquarters in Cincinnati, or south of Cincinnati, along with a bunch of other stuff that they have that's millions of dollars worth of stuff. That's not all bought by just simple donor dollars. So they have become something much more. And then they also make a lot more money through a variety of different ways. But they're not self-sufficient. There definitely is a large component of donation. The Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum wouldn't make it just by themselves. And so, there was a reply to that. Most of the money comes from homeschool curriculum sales. I don't think that's necessarily the case. They're making good money on that because they're in cahoots with the publisher. Everything they do is through master books, and so they're making a good amount of money on every single thing sold through them. So that's highly profitable. I doubt that it's the majority of their money though. And it is nonprofit, but there is some weirdness with the Ark Encounter. I don't fully understand the whole LLC, and then there's the hotel next door, and there's some question about how much ownership does certain people of Answers in Genesis have in the hotel, and So there's a lot of things going on there. I'm very curious what you think of R.C. Sproul. He didn't talk much about science, but he certainly rejected evolution. I suspect that he would at least label himself a creationist, even if perhaps not a young Earth one. Yeah, I don't want to go on too long about this, but I will say that, yeah, I'm really familiar with R.C. Sproul. Um, he's not I'm not familiar with him in the sense of growing up with R.C. Sproul. I mean, I know other people who've been very much in the R.C. Sproul strain. I'm near Pittsburgh, and that's where R.C. Sproul, got his start before going down to Florida. Ligonier Ministries, if that rings a bell with anybody, is his ministry, and he has a camp that's in near Pittsburgh, and many people went to that. But in graduate school, I went to a church where we watched a lot of R.C. Sproul tapes for Sunday school. And R.C. Sproul is a very good speaker, very good, kind of like Christian philosopher who can kind of, pull together the threads of history, philosophy, religion, and so forth. And it's not just all preachy type stuff. He's sort of like a big thinker. His son's really disappointing, R.C. Sproul Jr. He's gone off the deep end on a bunch of different things. And there's another case where you have an organization, Ligonier Ministries, who is all about R.C. Sproul, and like everything is R.C. Sproul. Although there were other people involved in that ministry, when R.C. Sproul died, they just continued to pump out, videos of him and chopping up previous things he said and writing more books and all that, and everything revolved around R.C. Sproul, and you can only do that for so long. And I couldn't even tell you any names of anybody else at that organization, even though the organization still exists. Right? That's what happened. They've searched and searched and searched to find a charismatic leader who could replace R.C. Sproul. And there just isn't. And R.C. Sproul Jr., you would have thought would be the one, but he got caught up in the whole, several different scandals. But what was the word? I won't be scandalous and tell you what the scandals were, but they were bad. All right. And he's still kind of recovering from that. He's lost a lot of his following and is just part of a small church now. Oh, I didn't really answer the question, did I? What do I think of R.C. Sproul? I think R.C. Sproul has a lot of value. I've learned a lot from him, and I would say that I agree with him on a lot of things. But with respect to his views on young Earth creation, they're complex. They're very complex. He's written in different ways, different times. He lived during a time in which he wasn't as forced as maybe people are today to make that choice. He would have hemmed and hawed on it. He would have called himself a creationist, but he would have, I think, left open, like, I'm not sure about the age of the earth. Could be young, might be something else. He understood there were different positions within the church. And he probably changed his mind over time, because I've seen people who have looked at his writings and said that it's clear that he at sometimes thought one thing and at another time thought was a little more, swung over toward the younger side. Arguments about in his last days where he ended up, but he always was probably cognizant of the fact that he didn't want to make that a mark of his ministry, like my position on young Earth creation, and then defines like who I am. Whereas somebody like Ken Ham wants everybody to do that, right? He wants to say, like, he wants to point his finger at every theologian, every famous person, every Christian apologist. What is your position? And you got to take a stand. You're either for or against him. And that pigeonholes everybody. And that ends up being detrimental, I believe very detrimental to the overall health of different ministries, because you are then labeled, and essentially people won't even listen to other, what might be very thoughtful and nuanced positions, because you are forced to take a particular position. And everyone thinks of that first, and then they associate lots of other things with that position. I mean, surely most of you are listening to this, when you hear young Earth creationism, you associate that not just with, I believe in the young Earth. You probably associate with a whole raft of other positions on many other social issues and other theological issues. And so by by that becoming the single voter issue, all right, for many people, it taints that ministry greatly. And I think Ligonier Ministries, they walked the line of not like having to like be pigeonholed in that area for a long time. And so I do appreciate that, right? I'm not critical of theologians for not coming out strongly against young earth creationism, because it is a powerful force, and you kind of have to make choices about like, I'm okay with like, I'm just not going to talk about that topic. That's not an important issue for me. Our area of interest is over here, and we'll leave that for other people to decide. And although I would love it if people took a stronger stand, I'm not really requiring it, because I understand where they're coming from there. This YE nonsense is basically only found in U.S. and Eastern Europe. I don't know about the Eastern Europe part. There's definitely some in Britain, Britain, Scotland. And there's a growing amount of young earth creationism in South America. Chile, a little bit in Argentina, and then pockets here and there. I've been to Guatemala and talked at a seminary there, and I was taken to the seminary library right there in Guatemala City, and there was this huge row of young earth creationist books translated into Spanish, which is a big deal. Right. And they're all donated to them. And the point was, the reason I was taken to that and shown that was like, see, we don't really have a whole lot of other like writings, representing other viewpoints. What we have this library that's stock full of, it makes it look like if you're a student here at the seminary, it's like, well, what am I supposed to think about the age of the earth and creation and Genesis? And then you walk to this section and it's like all young earth creationist material. So that's the kind of influence that Cunningham is looking for, right? They put a lot of effort into producing those kind of materials. Now that's a little bit of the old school way of influencing thing. Not many people go to the library anymore, but well, you might think people don't go to the library anymore. But if you're in another country, even though they do have access to the internet and maybe more material in their own language, they're still a little bit more used to and like, they like to have their own resources, and that includes like actual physical books. They're still handy in some parts of the world, believe it or not. Good riddance to John MacArthur. If you want to see what time of man is, check out the archive of Julie Roy's website. Oh boy, I don't want to go too far into the John MacArthur thing. I'm not personally much of a fan of John MacArthur for many of the reasons that are suggested here. John MacArthur is a Reformed influenced pastor, and therefore does have kinship with my theological background. And I know people who are absolute John MacArthur, like, addicted to him, I'll say. And that's certainly not me, because yes, I do see the flaws. I mean, he's a pastor that will say jumped the shark in terms of having been around way too long and become a caricature of himself. When you have said something for so long that you really can't, you no longer are a thoughtful, articulate person who can examine one's own thoughts, because you essentially are trapped by what you've said before, and everyone expects, when you have such dedicated followers, it's very hard to break out of that, right? This is the relationship between him and Ken Ham in my mind, right? Ken Ham can't really truly be honest with himself about anything, because he has propped himself up with so many different tropes and so many things he said so many different times. It's kind of like Trump, who says the same thing. If he just says the same lie enough times, he clearly believes it. All right, he clearly absolutely believes what he says in many cases. He talks himself into it, and then you're not going to change. You're not going to ever budge off of that. Ken Ham's not going to budge, and he's unreachable other than by the Holy Spirit touching his heart. And John MacArthur, I think, got to the same point. And there are other pastors that we could point to that have gotten to the point where it's like, you should have left the ministry earlier. All right, you should have retired allowed somebody else to move in, mentored somebody who could, be more malleable in terms of being shaped by those around him who give him good advice, as opposed to rising so far above everybody that no one can advise you. And you're just surrounded by yes people, which is what happens at some of these churches. You self-select into a pastoral board or an eldership situation in which those elders are all self-selected for those who are never going to push back. Doug Wilson, same thing up in Moscow, Idaho. Yeah, so I'm not one who'd say like, he's evil or anything like that. He was a sinner. He had a lot of issues. I think he was wrong on a number of different a few theological areas, but more so in his application to society. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Dr. Duff, I think you should send Mr. Ham an email suggesting that he hire you as his successor. Would you like me to draft such an email for you? By the way, do you know why Martin Iles left AIG? I do not know why Martin Iles left AIG. He's not spoken about it. Ken Ham's not spoken about it. They just talk about, it wasn't exactly these words, but it's the usual, a difference. Martin Iles was called, all right, to another calling. He had another vision of what he should be doing with his life, and it didn't completely align with our vision for what Answers in Genesis is going to be. And so we had an amicable parting of ways. Lots of like squishy words like that, nothing about the real story. Here's my speculation, and it is speculation. After having watched Martin Iles for quite a while and seen his personality type and how he interacts, although I completely disagree with Martin Iles on a bunch of stuff, and I find him kind of caustic. He's not nearly as caustic as Ken Ham. I originally thought he would be. I thought he'd be more caustic. I have found him to actually be kind of reasonable on especially some difficult political topics. I think he does not get the American political scene, right? I think that he looks at especially Trump and others and sees right through that stuff as there's lots wrong there, as not being a Christian worldview, and being very, very problematic. And I think he found it difficult to sort of like have to act like everything was great. Like he wouldn't be able to criticize that. Like Ken Ham he will criticize Trump and others a little bit here and there, but it's clear that it's also just like, hey, I wish you could do this a little bit better, but you're still my man, right? I don't think Martin Iles really could get on board completely with that. I don't think he believes in the American political system and either party. And so as an outsider from Australia, I think it was a harsh reality coming here and seeing what he would like, seeing the people who are donating to Answers in Genesis and what their expectations were and how they fall for so many different conspiracies. All right. That I think Martin Iles says that's not really right. I guess so maybe I'm giving Martin Iles a little bit more credit than he should be due, but I have been watching what he's been saying and doing since leaving Answers in Genesis, and that's the impression I get. Is that he has strong opinions. He thinks that Christian worldview is what everyone ought to have in a certain way, and he is a political animal. It's a different form of politics, and I believe that there was friction there. He just didn't feel like I'm going to be able to transform Answers in Genesis into something that I think it should be, and that's why he's starting his own thing where he'll be totally in control of it from the ground up. But again, that's just me with the tiny bit of experience I have, but because they don't offer any information and nobody says anything, they leave this open to this kind of speculation. Funny, the fact that the Ark Encounter is falling away is because of that apostasy. Maybe God is about to remove all the believers from the earth, so his focus will be back on Israel. Better look up, our redemption is drawing near. I'm not really sure if this is complete sarcasm or whether they're serious about this. Not absolutely certain what the intent here is. Sometimes I have trouble reading. It's like reading emails. I need a little more punctuation, maybe some emojis to tell me like where this is going. Yeah, is it apostasy? I certainly think that the whole Ark Encounter is misguided. It's a misguided attempt to convert people to the Christian faith through something that is, let's say, it's not the best argument for the Christian faith. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. This is a sad podcast in comment section. Ken Ham has devoted his life to creationism. Much of what we have today is because of him and his team. He was integral in building the Creation Museum and had the vision for building the Ark Museum. I don't care for the critical spirit in this. It's in poor taste. Yeah, I was a little snarky in my This Week in Creationism when talking about Ken Ham being lonely and his friends leaving him and speculating about his future. All those are legitimate areas of discussion. And I'm sharing that not just with non-creationists. I think creationists should listen to what I'm saying and think about that. I think that they should be thinking about these perspectives that I'm providing. And I did say, I made it very clear. I've often defended Ken Ham against those who think that Ken Ham is just a money grabbing individual who's just preying on people, using the Christian faith in order to extract money from people. Now that would accurately define a certain person who sells Bibles with their names on them and says they want donations because they want to try to get into heaven. And so if you give them money and they can able to do more things, that maybe that'll get them there. Now that's a money grab. For sure, and not about real true conviction. But Ken Ham has conviction. I've seen him in person. I've heard him talk enough. He's not making it up. He this is the life he lives, and he believes it. He's passionate. The reason he's hanging on is because he cares. Right? So he has devoted himself to creationism. I'm just saying he's devoted himself to something that's unfortunately not the best place to place his devotion. I mean, he would be better served doing something else for God's kingdom than creating the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum. And there's no doubt that there are people who have come to the Ark Encounter and have come to the Creation Museum and have been converted. There's no doubt there are stories. There are people that become convicted by that and become Christians. But the Holy Spirit can use even the weakest of vessels. All right. Right. And then this is what we talk about in witnessing. Somebody might not know the words and their faith is very bad, but as long as they're God can use words, even if they're not said in exactly the right way, to convert and change minds. We would even say all right, most Protestants would say Catholics are wrong in a large portion of their theology, but it's possible to sit in a Catholic church and hear God's words because they would read the scripture and come to an actual right understanding of scripture through that. But you wouldn't recommend, I think you should go down to the local Catholic church and that's where you should start. I think that would be the best way to become a Christian. Just like I wouldn't say, to somebody who doesn't know anything about the Christian faith, head down to the Ark Encounter because that'll give you your best introduction to the world of Christianity, to the truth of Christianity. And I say boy, that is a seriously flawed introduction to the Christian faith, but it might work for a few people. All right, so that's why I say he's devoted to it. Yes, I don't doubt his sincerity. Unlike many people who will. They're very sarcastic about it. They think that he's just a shyster and is taking advantage of people. No, he really, 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 really believes in what he's doing. And he's poured his whole heart and soul and life into it. And he is not making bank on this himself. His salary is very reasonable for the leader of a large organization that has the resources it has. He is not, you know, flying across the world and has yachts. And I mean, he's not frivolous. He's a wise spender of money. I think he's too thrifty. I mean, he relies on a ton of volunteers, and he kind of like, it's forced labor. It's like, gets people to do things voluntarily because it's a mission, right? And so probably, needs to be a little looser with the money and spending a little bit more money. I think that they're a very efficient organization, and there's not a lot of waste. I mean, $150,000 salary is like peanuts for somebody that's in that kind of situation. So, and yes, his family has benefited and all that, but it's not like they're living in these giant mansions, and they're not wasting money. They're pouring it right back into the ministry. So in that sense, they're not ostentatious at all. So I have defended that. I have defended his sincerity and his desire to do a good work. I just think it's misdirected, right? It's kind of sad to spend your whole life doing something that is maybe not the true will of God. Yeah. So I would encourage you to watch a few more of my videos. I think that I am probably a lot more fair to young earth creationists than most are. But at the end of the day, yes, I disagree and find that many of their arguments are ridiculous. And at some point you have to say they're ridiculous. And you try to say it as politely as you can, but if you say someone's idea is just nonsense, right, it's hard to come off sounding a really, really polite and not critical in spirit at times. I do the best job I can at that. All right. This is going on a lot longer than I thought. So I have a lot to say. This is why I didn't write these comments, right? I mean, this is why I struggle in responding to comments on Facebook, other than just saying like, thanks. Hey, I appreciate the comment. Because I want to write paragraphs, as real responses to individuals, not just trite, quick responses. And as you can see, this is an hour long just to respond to 15, comments. And I've just got a couple more here. Some creationists may be off the mark with their believing in young earth made in a short period based on the Bible, but all right, young earth creationists might be wrong, but y'all got a lot of other problems yourself, and you might be wronger. I mean, is essentially the tone here. Neo-Darwinian evolutionist theories are falling apart in the face of recent discoveries that seriously challenge their undirected random narrative. Stephen Meyer's book, Darwin's Doubt, totally destroys the evolutionary theory with the discovery of fossils during the Cambrian era that showed an explosion of new creatures with no prior links from the previous era. Darwin's Doubt is a pretty old book. There's plenty of reviews of it by legitimate scientists that critique it. Stephen Meyer he paints a particular picture of evolutionary theory without painting a full-blown set of different hypotheses that other scientists have proposed. And so he's kind of cherry picking particular views and then contrasting his view with that. There's lots of different things I could use in order to critique this, but let's just say I don't find Darwin's Doubt a very compelling book at all, with my knowledge of the paleontological record and having known a lot of people who work in that particular area. That such a sudden and huge shift refutes the long timeline of millions of years. I have no problem with the rapid changes that occur in the Cambrian. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And besides, rapid is still 40, 50 million years. That's a heck of a lot of time. It's rapid with respect to the billion years of evolution and the typical somewhat longer period of time to make more radical changes. But it's not as if it's unfounded. What's discovered there. It gets worse for evolution. The discovery of DNA in the 1950s results in a massive amount of code required in the ordered sequence to determine a creature's characteristics, multiple millions of bits of code, not unlike computer code. I mean, it has some similarities to computer code, but it's not computer code. And certainly it is not copied like computer code, and it's not used like computer code. Random mutations, a foundation premise of evolution to produce new advanced species, fails. First, because the majority of mutations are either regressive or neutral. We'd have to get into a long discussion about natural selection and sorting and all the stuff that I've talked about a lot of times on other parts of the channel, and there are other channels that have gone into great detail about the misconceptions in this particular argument. The final nail in the coffin is the massive mathematical improbability of DNA and its associated bits lining up correctly is akin to giving 1,000 monkeys a word processors to hope by chance that they recreate the entire works of Shakespeare by randomly punching keys in given enough time. That's a 30-year-old argument that illustrates a wait a second, I have to try to be charitable here, right? That illustrates a number of misconceptions about evolutionary theory and randomness and mutations. I'll leave it at that. All right, but thanks for your comment. I'm glad you're listening and have watched some of my videos. And these are all things that deserve long responses, but those responses are out there. And I just have to defer to the fact that there are lots of really intelligent scientists, including many Christians who work in this field, who can readily and easily debunk most everything in this comment. There's so many people willing to pay the outrageous prices to get in the stupid exhibit in the first place. He wants to bleed every attendee dry every cent possible. Again, I'm like I just got done saying I don't think Ken Ham is that greedy. He's not bleeding people dry. I mean, he's a business person in the sense that they have a marketing team, and I'm sure they do a zillion calculations. If we raise the price $2, how much will attendance go down? But he would generally say, like, this is the going price, if you go to Disney World or any of these other places, and that's the way they pitch themselves. We're that important. We're providing entertainment value. We're providing edutainment. All right. You get entertained, but you also get educated. And they're world-class. He always uses the word world-class exhibits, and they are high-quality exhibits. They spend a lot of money, LED screens, fancy stuff. I mean, it is top-notch presentation. And so that comes at a cost, and I don't disagree that the cost is not commensurate with going to any other major park. I think you should bite the bullet and make it cheaper and bring more people in, but I don't know what their real finances are. $64.99 for an adult. Yeah, I do. I mean, that was really hard to pay. Plus parking. I think parking is only $10. It says $15 here. I might be wrong. They might have increased it to $15. And so, yeah, it's expensive. If you start calculating how much it's going to cost a family of 5 to go to the Ark Encounter, especially if they're going to spend a day and a half, go to the Ark Encounter and the Art Creation Museum, it's a lot. You're going to drop $1,000 practically, once you calculate in food and stay, for all of that. It's pricey. But people are willing to pay it. Well, seemingly fewer people lately are willing to pay for it. And I do think the economy, even though I know we're told that we're living in the golden age and like this is the best economy we've ever had, and certain people keep saying that over and over and over again, but I don't think the average person who is going to the Ark Encounter actually feels that way. They might actually say it, believing maybe it's true for most people, but when asked for themselves, maybe not. All right, enjoy. That's the final word. There's probably been more comments written since I started this because I've been talking for an hour now. But those are the ones that were there when I checked right before I started making this video. If you're still here, man, bless you. So, thanks. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.